Hello and welcome. We are back with more looking at the executive branch as we are going down looking at Madison's cabinet. Before we get into today's video, I do want to go ahead and remind you got two ways to donate to the channel if you are so inclined. I have a Patreon account, which is a monthly, month-to-month donation system, and I have a Coffee account, which can do much the same thing, but also allows you to make single one-time donations. I'll have links to both in the description box below the video. If you are in financial straits or trouble, please do not donate. Even if donating itself will put you in trouble, do not donate. I'd rather you take care of what you need to take care of. It's tough enough for everyone out there with morons in fucking charge. If you can afford to, though, and you want to, thank you. I do appreciate it. It's me, myself, and I do all the data collection, filming, editing, posting. So, yeah. I also don't do commercials as a personal choice, and I'm not getting any money from video views or anything like that. So, with that said, let's go ahead and hop into the video. Today, we are looking at the Madison administration's Department of Justice, which is your attorney generals. And we have three: Caesar Augustus Rodney from 1809 to 1811, William Pinckney, 1811 to 1814, and Richard Rush, 1814 to 1817. With that said, let's go ahead and take a look at these three individuals. We'll start off with the top here, Caesar Augustus Rodney. He is the uncle of Caesar Augustus Rodney and brother of Thomas Rodney, and was a delegate from Delaware who was born in Dover, Delaware on October the 7th, 1780. Have I got the right Caesar Augustus? I'm kind of questioning myself. Yeah, I think we're wanting the nephew, Caesar Augustus Rodney, and says Caesar Rodney. Yep, Caesar Augustus Rodney. That's it. He's the son of Thomas Rodney, cousin of George Bridges Rodney, and nephew of Caesar Rodney. He was a representative and senator from Delaware, born in Dover, Delaware, on January 4th, 1772, before America claimed independence just by a few years. Completed prep studies and graduated under the University of from the University of Philadelphia, or Pennsylvania at Philadelphia in 1789, studied law, admitted to the bar, and began practice in Wilmington, Delaware in 1793. Member of the State House of Representatives 1796 to 1802, before being elected as a Democratic Republican to the 8th Congress, serving looks like a one-term total. Was not a candidate for renomination in 1804, one of the managers appointed by the House of Representatives in January 1804 to conduct the impeachment proceedings against John Pickering, a judge of the U.S. District Court for New Hampshire, and in Delaware of the same year against Samuel Chase, an associate justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. He was Attorney General for the United States in the cabinet of Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison for a total 1807 to 1811. So he ended out Jefferson and started Madison's. When he resigned, and he would serve in the War of 1812. be a member of the Delaware Committee of Safety in 1813, member of the State Senate 1815 to 1816, and was sent to South America by President James Monroe as one of the commissioners to investigate the report on the propriety of recognizing the independence of the Spanish American republics. He was elected to the 17th Congress and served March 4th, 1821 to January 24th, 1822, when he would resign and be elected as a Democratic Republican to the U.S. Senate, and served from January 24th, 1822 to January 29th, 1823, when he resigned and would be appointed minister plenipotentiary to Argentina in 1823 and serve until his death in Buenos Aires on June the 10th, 1824. Would be buried at the British Cemetery in Chacarita district of Buenos Aires, Argentina. So yeah, Caesar Augustus Rodney had been a representative, senator, minister, attorney general, and he went to school to study law, so served in the War of 1812. Yeah, let's go ahead and look at the Miller Center, what they say about him. And of course, remember the Miller Center's a part of University of Virginia, so. But anyway, let me take a drink here. He was born Dover, Delaware, January 4th, 1772. Graduated University of Pennsylvania. And following 3 years of law private practice, he would begin his legislative career in the Delaware House of Representatives, serving 1796 to 1802, and then his state service soon led to a position at the national level as he spoke for Delaware at the U.S. House of Representatives from 1802 to 1805. He ascended to President Jefferson's cabinet in 1805, performing the duties of Attorney General until 1811 and resigning under Madison. Upon resigning, he resumed law practice and would eventually serve as a captain in the Delaware militia during the War of 1812. He ended his respite from politics and would serve on the Delaware Committee on Safety in 1813 and then in the Delaware State Senate 1815 to 1816. Returned to the U.S. House of Representatives and remain on the national stage when he becomes a U.S. Senator 1822 to 1823. He also spent a number of years in foreign service, leaving in 1817 with a commission to investigate newly formed South American republics and serving as minister plenipotentiary to Argentina, 1823 to 1824. So yeah, remember, a lot of the Spanish American, what they're talking about, is the colonies in the Americas that were originally owned by Spain and Portugal. And a lot of these nations would eventually gain freedom. And so, yeah, it's like, all right, we want to recognize a lot of these new countries kind of coming to realization. So, yeah. And let's see, this is from the U.S. House of Representatives. It's just an image of Caesar Augustus Rodney. Here they got a small biography. Looks like it's mainly all the stuff we've talked about so far, though. They've been pretty precise on what he's done. It was President Monroe who actually sent him to be a minister and investigate on the new republics. He served under Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, all three of them. But most of the information seems pretty much the same. Was in Delaware's General Assembly. It's House of Representatives, serving the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Delaware, and as a U.S. Senator to represent Delaware, U.S. Attorney General, and U.S. Minister to Argentina. Son of Thomas Rodney and Elizabeth Fisher, nephew of Caesar Rodney, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, who is actually depicted on the Delaware State Quarter when they did all those state quarters. After graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, studied law under Joseph B. McKean in Philadelphia before being admitted to the bar and practicing law in Wilmington and Newcastle. And remember, Delaware is not a big state, so yeah, it would be very easy to cover a great majority of the state just practicing from Wilmington and Newcastle both. Serving in the State House, the U.S. House, he would be part of the impeachment process against both John Pickering and Samuel Chase. Pickering was charged with conduct unbecoming a judge, and his acquittal was viewed as strengthening the independence of the judiciary. And apparently it was a similar such case against Samuel Chase. 8 articles of impeachment alleging misconduct. Attorney General was in the Delaware State Senate, and his time he spent in South America. The newly formed South American republics, and would strongly advocate such recognition, and with Graham published his findings in 1819 as reports on the present state of the United States of South America. And Graham, we're talking John Graham here. So yeah, the report is thought to have contributed much to the thinking behind the policy that eventually became the Monroe Doctrine. In and of saying, look, Europe, Asia, all y'all, stay out of South and Middle and North America. We don't need you forming new colonies here. America hereby defends North and South America and Central America. But it became an excuse to interfere. So originally it was just telling the other nations, stay out. We don't need you trying to develop new colonies here. So yeah. Yeah, so he held a lot of offices. State legislature, U.S. Representative, Attorney General, State Senate, then back in as U.S. House of Representatives, then U.S. Senator, then Resident Minister. So he had a large number of just different jobs. The longest one he stayed with was being the representative of the state. 4, 5, 6. He was twice in the U.S. House, one full term and then one partial term, because he would become senator, but only stay as a senator for a year when he becomes a minister, resident minister for the nation of Argentina, serving in the State House, in the U.S. Congress, and his election wins. Okay, but that's a good look at Caesar Augustus Rodney. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at our next individual, William Pinckney. Pinckney was born in Annapolis, Maryland in 1764, and while he received no formal college education, many considered him the finest American lawyer of the era. And he gained his first political experience as a member of the Maryland House of Delegates, 1789 to 1792. His seat he earned following his participation in the Maryland Constitutional Convention of 1788, and after a brief and contested stay as a U.S. representative in 91, he returned to Maryland, serving on the State Executive Council 1792 to 1795, and then again went back to the Maryland House of Delegates in 1795. His domestic political career continued in 1805 with his service in Maryland as Maryland's Attorney General. In 1811, he rose to the position of U.S. Attorney General in the cabinet of President James Madison, where he served until 1814. And while Attorney General, also participated in the War of 1812, serving as a major in the Maryland militia. He went on to serve the U.S. in several capacities overseas as well, including a joint minister to Great Britain, 1806 to 1807, minister plenipotentiary to Great Britain, 1807 to 1811, and minister plenipotentiary to Russia and Naples, 1816 to 1818. He returned to the United States in 1819 to serve a final term with the U.S. Senate and would die in Washington, D.C. while in office on February the 25th, 1822. See how long the Britannica article is? Okay, good. It's not long at all. He was born March 17th, 1764. Annapolis, Maryland, died February 25th, 1822, Washington, D.C., U.S. statesman, diplomat, and as we've already mentioned, considered one of the finest, foremost lawyers of his day. He was a member of the Maryland Convention that ratified the federal Constitution in 1788, so they could replace the Articles of Confederation. And of course, that set up the Constitution to become the Constitution we know today, although it's been through several amendments. Pinckney himself voted against ratification and served in the Maryland State Legislature 1788 to 1792 and in 1795, and on the state's Executive Council 1792 to 1795. From 1796 to 1804, he represented the United States as a commissioner to negotiate an agreement with Great Britain concerning American maritime losses. And he served as U.S. Minister to Great Britain from 1807 to 1811. And of course, what's coming on the horizon? The War of 1812. He was U.S. Attorney General in 1811 to 1814 under Madison, served in the U.S. House of Representatives 1815 to 1816, and was the Minister of Russia 1816 to 1818. From 1892 to 1822, 1819 to 1822, he was member of the U.S. Senate, where he became a champion of the slave states. And remember, technically, Maryland is on the underside of the Mason-Dixon line. The Mason-Dixon line is right at the top of Maryland, where it borders with Pennsylvania. So yeah, there shouldn't be surprises. There were sympathies with slave states, is what I'm trying to make people understand if they're kind of confused by that. Successfully argued many important cases before the Supreme Court, including McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819, in which the power of Congress to charter the Bank of the United States was upheld. So yeah. Let's see, do they have anything of interest? Image of William Pinckney. Looks like a lot of the same information. Appointed by President Washington as one of the commissioners to London under the Jay Treaty. So again, he served all the way back to George Washington. I don't think he served under John Adams, though. And I'm not seeing any mention of Jefferson. But he would serve under Madison and Monroe. Joint Minister to Great Britain. Well, he would serve with Monroe as a joint minister to Great Britain, and he would serve as the Attorney General for Madison. Did he actually serve under Monroe? He was appointed as minister by Monroe. And let's see, what can we find? Born during the time when the United States was still a collection of 13 colonies in 1764. Because remember, we don't declare independence until 1776, so he'd be 12 years of age when that would happen. His parents' home was on the banks of the Severn River, where they could see the Chesapeake Bay. Had English ancestry, attended King William's School, which is now known as St. John's College. He would leave school at the age of 13. He still, at that point, had impressed his teacher with his intelligence, and the teacher would agree to give him private lessons at home. Pinckney studied medicine, which he did not practice, but also read law with an established firm, as was the practice at the time for aspiring lawyers. He would be admitted to the bar in 1786, practicing law for 2 years in Harford County, Maryland. Go into Maryland State Senate. Considered an excellent orator with an impressive command of language. Said to have been articulate and pleasing in his manner. Married Anne Rogers, and they would have 10 children together. And Edward Coote Pinckney, born 7th of the 10, was ranked as an accomplished poet posthumously. He would serve as mayor of the city of Annapolis from 1795 to 1800. So yeah, he held all kinds of positions. Appointed Attorney General for the District of Pennsylvania by Jefferson, and then appointed as Attorney General for the state of Maryland by Jefferson. Monroe names him a diplomat, and he and Monroe would negotiate the Monroe-Pinckney Treaty, but it would lack provisions to end the British act of impressment of American sailors, and was subsequently rejected by President Jefferson and never implemented, because one of the main things we talked about this, remember? He wanted an end to impressment, the capturing of ships, impressing the sailors. And you have to remember, impressment is basically you take the sailors and put them to work on your ships. So even though they're American sailors, the British were like, no, we need more sailing hands, so you'll work on our ship. That's what the whole thing of impressment was about. Minister Plenipotentiary, Maryland State Senate, served as Attorney General under Madison, Major in the U.S. Army during the War of 1812, wounded at the Battle of Bladensburg, and after the war served as congressman for the 5th District of Maryland from 1815 to 1816. I think that's the modern day 5th District, not back then. Minister Plenipotentiary of Russia, along with a special mission to the Kingdom of Naples. Because remember, Italy wasn't a unified country yet. There were small city-state kingdoms, like Naples. McCulloch versus Maryland on the right to make a Bank of the U.S. Senator for Maryland, from Maryland, in the U.S. Senate, where he served until his death, and will be buried at the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. He didn't go without having criticism of himself, though. Writer, critic, and fellow Baltimore lawyer John Neal dedicated 8 pages in his 1823 novel Randolph to criticizing William Pinckney. Though written before his death, it was published shortly thereafter with a footnote explaining that the author acknowledged Pinckney's death but decided to publish the book as originally written anyway. And though Neal referred to him as the greatest lawyer in America, he also characterized his speeches as a compound of stupendous strength, feeble ornament, affected earnestness, and boisterous, turbulent declamation, concluding that God never meant William Pinckney as for an orator. His insults went as far as to call Pinckney a notorious sloven who could be seen wiping his nose and lips on the sleeve of his coat. Of course, at that time, it was more proper to wipe them on a tissue that you would have with you. On the basis of the printed insults, Pinckney's son, Edward Coote Pinckney, challenged Neal to a duel, which Neal would refuse, and the episode likely contributed to Neal's decision to leave Baltimore later that same year. William Pinckney. And finally, let's look at Richard Rush, the final Attorney General under Madison. Born August 29, 1780 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and died July the 30th, 1859 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Was an American attorney, diplomat, and statesman who, while serving as the acting U.S. Secretary of State in 1817, negotiated the Rush-Bagot Agreement and with Great Britain providing for disarmament on the Great Lakes after the War of 1812. Remember, Great Lakes, right between the U.S. and Canada was still very much a British colony. You wouldn't want armed ships constantly clashing on the Great Lakes. He was the son of noted physician Benjamin Rush and graduated from Princeton in 1797 and admitted to the bar in Philadelphia of 1800. He served as Attorney General of Pennsylvania in 1811, Attorney General of the United States 1814 to 1817, and Secretary of the Treasurer from 1825 to 1829. In 1828, he was the candidate for vice president on the unsuccessful ticket headed by his mentor, John Quincy Adams. The Rush, it may be Bagot, but I'm going to pronounce it as if it's French, Rush-Bagot agreement was concluded by Rush, who then, from March to September of 1817, was acting as U.S. Secretary of State, and Bagot, the British Prime Minister in Washington, D.C. As Minister to Great Britain, 1817 to 1825, Rush was aided by Albert Gallatin, as we've already mentioned, who was a Secretary of State for Madison, and then at that point had become U.S. Minister to France. They negotiated another agreement in 1818 that fixed the 49th parallel as the boundary between Canada and the U.S. from the Lake of the Woods, which lies in Ontario, Manitoba, and Minnesota, to the Rocky Mountains. It permitted for 10 years of settlement of U.S. citizens and British subjects in the Oregon Territory without prejudicing the claim of either government to that region. In addition to the U.S.-Canadian negotiations, Rush participated in conferences concerning Latin America with George Canning, British Foreign Minister, and later Prime Minister, that led to the enunciation of the Monroe Doctrine. In 1836, as a U.S. agent in London, Rush received a bequest of £104,960, by which James Smithson founded the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., and Rush considered his role in founding the museum his most important public service. So, yeah, he would found the Smithsonian Institute after receiving a donation from the man it's named after, James Smithson, from England, and he would found it in D.C. So that's who we have to thank for the Smithsonian Institute. Let's go ahead and look at his Miller Center biography here. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, August 29, 1780, and graduated from Princeton University. Political career as Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania in 1811, and it was a post that was earned largely through public recognition of his sustained excellence as a practicing lawyer, 1800 to 1811. He soon moved into the employ of President Madison, becoming the Comptroller of the Treasury in 1811, and with the onset of the war in 1812, the administration's Speaker on War Policy. By 1814, he had become Attorney General of the United States, serving in that capacity until 1817, and with the arrival of Monroe's presidential administration in 1817, Rush would accept the position of interim Secretary of State, gained additional cabinet experience from 1825 to 1829 as Secretary of the Treasury during the presidency of John Quincy Adams. So, he's held a number of positions: Attorney General, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, serving under Monroe, Madison, or was it under Madison? I think it was under Madison that he was Attorney General. Yeah, Attorney General under Madison, interim Secretary of State under Monroe, and Secretary of the Treasury under John Quincy Adams. He served abroad for several years as well, acting as U.S. Minister to Great Britain, 1817 to 1825, and President James K. Polk's Minister to France from 1847 to 1849. Beyond his political involvement, he also was largely responsible for the construction of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He would die in Philadelphia on July the 30th, 1859. So again, never president, but served under presidents many, many times. There's a lot individuals we've seen like that. Comptroller of the Treasury under Madison, Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania, and was an advisor to Madison during the War of 1812, and would eventually become the U.S. Attorney General, the last one for Madison. He would remain in that position under Monroe and would serve as acting Secretary of State briefly under Monroe. Ambassador, Minister to France, helped establish and served on the Board of Regents for the Smithsonian Institution, and was the last surviving member of the Madison and Monroe cabinets. So he outlived both presidents and other members of the cabinet who served under those two presidents. Born to Benjamin Rush and Julia Stockton Rush, who herself was daughter of Richard Stockton and Annis Boudinot Stockton. He was the second son and third child of the couple, so yeah. Studied law in the practice of William Lewis and admitted to the bar in 1800, married Catherine Eliza Murray in the fall of 1809, and they would have 11 children, including the lawyer and writer Benjamin Rush, and Union Army Colonel in the Civil War, Richard H. Rush. He, as a lawyer, would gain attention over a speech he gave condemning the HMS Leopards, which is a British ship, which stands for His Majesty or Her Majesty's, depending on if it's Queen or King at the time, ship, Leopard. And of course, the USS is United States ship. The S could be service or ship, but I believe it's ship. It's essentially the same thing as what it stands for. But the Leopard attacked the Chesapeake. And in 1911, Attorney General of Pennsylvania acquitted William Duane in a libel suit brought forth by the Pennsylvania Governor Thomas McKean, and uh, his popularity prompted an offer to run for Congress, but he would decline and become comptroller of the Treasury for James Madison in November of 1811. Served in the War of 1812. I was trying to remember what it's called. It's right there. Would become a close friend with Madison while he served as comptroller of the Treasury. He wouldn't serve in. Yeah, he would serve. He was on the field of battle along with Madison during the Battle of Bladensburg. So it wasn't necessarily that he would serve, but he was at the battle. In 1814, Madison offered Rush the choice of Secretary of the Treasury, being that he was already Comptroller of the Treasury, or Attorney General. That Attorney General is what Rush would choose. He would be Attorney General to start Monroe's term off, and would also become an acting Secretary of State briefly in 1817. And then would become Minister to Britain to succeed future President John Quincy Adams, who had taken a position as Secretary of State. Negotiated with George Canning over British proposals that the two countries issue a joint declaration against French support for Spain during the Spanish-American Wars of Independence. And again, it's not necessarily Spain against the U.S., it's a lot of the revolutions the Spanish nations in the Americas would go through. There eventually would be a U.S.-Spain war, but that's 1900, 1898, 99, 1900. Canning would refuse to agree to Russia's demands for a joint recognition of the newly independent Latin American republics, leading to separate American declaration of the Monroe Doctrine. So it's like, well, what if we still want to interfere? No, this is American protected. John Quincy Adams ran and would be elected in 1825, and thus Richard Rush would want to become a Secretary of the Navy. But Adams, however, immediately nominated him to the post of Secretary of the Treasury. And Rush would accept, and in 1828 was the candidate for vice president on the re-election ticket for John Quincy Adams, but Adams would be defeated. Went overseas at the behest of cities of Alexandria, Virginia, and Georgetown to secure funds on the construction of a canal connecting the Chesapeake Bay and the Ohio River. And in 1836, President Andrew Jackson sent him to England as commissioner to secure the U.S. the legacy left by the government by James Smithson. And it would bring money left by Smithson, and he would have the Smithsonian Institution founded and become one of the first regents of the institution. Was part of the anti-Mason party for a short time, after a short time in the late 30s, and became a member of the Democratic Party. Was opposed to anti-slavery sentiments because he believed they threatened the stability of the Union. and in 1847 was appointed as Minister to France by President Polk. And when his negotiations were interrupted by the overthrow of King Louis Philippe, he was among the first foreign diplomats to recognize the new French Second Republic. Buried in Philadelphia, 5 U.S. Coast Guard vessels named in his honor. U.S. R.C. Richard Rush, which was a Morris Taney class cutter. That was in 1831. The U.S. G.C. Richard Rush in 1874, a Dexter class cutter. The U.S. R.C. Rush in 1885, a revenue cutter. The USS Rush II, WSC 151, 1927 cutter, and the United States Coast Guard, I'm not sure what the final C stands for, Rush, WHEC 723 in 1969, a Hamilton class cutter. The USCGC Rush WMSM 918 Heritage class cutter is under construction and scheduled for delivery in 2026. Has a number of books which he was mentioned in or wrote. Thoughts on the Administration of Justice in Pennsylvania in 1809. Memoranda of the Residents at the Court of London in 1833. 2 letters on public subjects in 1851. And Washington in Domestic Life from original letters and manuscripts in 1857. So the names at the end might just be the publishers. He might have wrote all 4 of the books because they were in his lifetime. So yeah. But yeah, that's everything on Richard Rush. This was still a pretty long video, but we did make it through. I need to start pre-planning better, but I get right up on the moment to push the video, and usually just put everything out there and read. That's why it's more of a slop job than anything in doing these videos instead of actually doing the research to put it together. I find the research sources, I try to find good sources, but often it ends up me just reading and making commentary upon it, which honestly isn't what you would want if you actually study history. So, but with all that said, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources, and it can't be tinfoil hat sources or a bunch of anecdotes slapped together to try to make sources, such as I know a man who knows a farmer who once saw a groundhog dig a tunnel straight to China. No. No, you didn't. Thank you. I'll be putting these links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.